Alright, hello everyone. Today I've got something for you, which is a short story written by a guy named Walter de la Mare. He's actually more well known for his children's stories and poetry rather than his short stories that we might be interested in. I was poking around at various authors who were mentioned in that Lovecraft essay about horror and literature, and one of the authors, and I checked out, I kind of poked around at a bunch of them. One of them that Lovecraft mentions is this Walter de la Mare, and he talks about him saying that um, de la Mare does not make fear the sole or even the dominant element of most of his tales, being apparently more interested in the subtleties of the character involved. Um, so I went looking around for some of his stories. One that Lovecraft mentioned was called Seaton's Aunt, and so I found a short story collection that had Seaton's Aunt in it, and I read it, and honestly, I found Seaton's Aunt to be a little bit forgettable. However, for one reason or another, there was another story in that collection that jumped out at me. The title was simply A Revenant. And, I kind of thought, well, maybe we're going to get some kind of mediocre, jump scary, undead thing kind of story. When in reality, what I got far exceeded my expectations. Lovecraft mentions the subtleties of character, and this story has subtleties of character in droves. I'm not actually going to do a spoiler part for this story, for this review, because I suspect that very few people have actually read de la Mare's story, A Revenant, and so I'm just going to give some brief details and a few quotes and talk about my reaction to the story. So, this story, like the Willows, which was another story that was in that thing that in that Lovecraft essay that got me, thinking about other authors. This is a very good example of a slow build-up, while also looking very closely at characters, which was something that there wasn't a whole lot of character internal monologue in the Willows so much. It was mostly the atmosphere. In this story, it's very much about the characters. It's basically a story that is about a professor who's giving a talk about literature. It's a very kind of academic kind of feel at first. There's a careful study of his state of mind and a very slow build of this odd creepiness that kind of grows throughout the story and reaches a crescendo near the end and then vanishes almost as quickly as the fear in the story itself vanishes. The professor, in the middle of this talk, kind of gets more into the talk than he expected. He talks about how he's very happy to give talks that don't excite, but rather stimulate intellectually, right? He kind of has that ideal early on in the story, but as the story proceeds on, as his talk goes on, he kind of strays from that path. And the result is something that I thought was very, very well done, very interesting, and something for any person who consumes or produces art of any sort to kind of think about. So let me just give you guys a couple of quotes. Early on in the story, we get this very nice little description of kind of where the professor is and where he's sitting. Quote, "Nevertheless, and not for the first time, as the professor stood alone up there on the platform, full in the glare of an arc lamp suspended almost immediately over his head, he had become sharply aware not only that he was, with one single exception, the only human being present who was not sitting down, but also that he was the only human being present who was making a noise. The realization in this intensity, at any rate, was new to him, and it made him a little uneasy. Not that he had much patience with members of his own calling who pretend they dislike lecturing. That must be affectation. He enjoyed it." End quote. We get a terse but effective description, the glare of the arc lamp. We get a vivid description of his state of mind. He's kind of in the middle of a mixture of creepy solitude and kind of a scoffing positivity, right? He's like, I feel very alone up here. I'm the only person who's standing up. I'm the only person who's making a noise. And yet at the same time, this is kind of the status of a lecturer. Who are you trying to convince, me or you, kind of thing going on there. And he kind of has that scoffing positivity. He's like, well, people who pretend that they don't like being in this situation, who do this as a profession, must clearly be, pretending, putting on airs. But not me. I don't put on airs. I just give the facts. And this is something that comes back to bite him, because his original stance of kind of objectivity gradually gets broken as the story proceeds. We get something later on like this, quote, "A man's style, whether in prose or verse, in some degree, of course, reveals that man himself. But we must be careful. A style that may be good from a merely literary point of view is not necessarily the work of a good man, nor is a bad style necessarily the work of a rascal. Otherwise, how few men of science, philosophers even, would escape damnation." Here he's being philosophical, but also deeply judgmental. And that's showing the motion of his character, or of his state of mind, from an objective perspective to a much more subjective one. And this is part of what engineers the little bit of downfall that he experiences in the course of this story. He's kind of lofty, but at the same time talking about damnation. So he kind of putting on airs himself here. It's showing the gradual change of his state of mind, and I really enjoy it. Then finally, this one stranger decides to ask him a question after the lecture's over. And, he basically waits for everybody to leave the room and then walks up and says, "Well, can I ask you a question?" The professor says, "Sure, you were supposed to ask the questions when everybody was still here, but feel free to ask it now." And he says this, "Thank you," said the stranger. "When I disagree, I prefer to stand. I have come, as you see, unarmed, except in respect of the tongue. We are on equal terms, then, though you might perhaps agree that in matters of the mind, one solitary question may be almost mortal in effect." End quote. There's a subtlety here that's going on. It's almost a threat. One solitary question may, in fact, be mortal. It pushes the professor and the reader, that is to say me, into a specific mindset while not actually suggesting anything direct. It's very subtle. It's very dependent on your state of mind being built up over time in this way. I won't give you guys any more quotes. I'll put a link in the description as to where you can read this story. I was going to do a reading of it, but it turns out that after I did some study, it looks like it's not actually in the public domain. So I don't think I can do a reading until it reaches the public domain. But fortunately, it is available in some library books that are out of the public domain in certain countries. So I'll post some links for that if you want to give this story a read. And of course, you can always go check out the original. It was called the original collection that the story was in. Again, links in the description. But the thing I liked about this story is the way that it pushed you in the direction of this kind of vague fear without ever jumping out at you. There's no point where, like, oh, suddenly here's the scare, right? Here's the ghost jumping out and saying boo. At no point does that happen. What instead happens is that this kind of persistent dread rises gradually over the course of the story, and it ends with this very fascinating argument by this stranger that kind of ends up as this very impassioned monologue that also is something that I think people who, consume or produce art should think about. It's very well thought out and very interesting to read. And so I encourage you to go check out the links that I provide and go read it yourself. And I hope you enjoy it. So as far as, if you're still here, as far as the copyright situation went on, it was published in a book in 1936, but the author died in 1956, but he's an English author, and so yada, yada, yada. The copyright may either expire at the beginning of 2026, or it may actually be in 2030 or something like that, so I don't know. But we'll see. I may go back to it and do a reading once it actually reaches the public domain. Anyway, I hope you like this review. Please, by all means, if this story sounds like it might be at all interesting to you, go give it a read. It's only about 30 pages. You can probably read it in half an hour, maybe a little more than half an hour. And it is a very not fun, but it's got a very good little sense of this kind of persistent dread that was also present in The Willows. So anyway, if you like stories like that, go give it a look, and see what, maybe I'll go reread Seaton's Aunt and do a review of that at some point as well. So yeah, Walter de la Mare, best known for his children's stories, best known for his poetry, actually wrote some very good scary little short stories as well, and worth someone to put on your list, I guess. So yeah, that's what I got for today. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, links in the description. Support the channel, whatever. Y'all know the drill. And yeah, I will see you next time, and have a good rest of your week.